The 16th of May 1942 would start like any other day in war-weary Plymouth. The local population were trying to regain some semblance of normality during a respite from the ravages of an intensive blitz. The ferocious German air raids had ceased for a while because the Luftwaffe were thankfully preoccupied over the skies in Russia. Plymouth Sound was busy with shipping. Merchant vessels were anchored in Jennycliff Bay, waiting to join a convoy. Massive Sunderland seaplanes were taxiing across the Sound, off to fight the U-boat menace. A pair of boom defence vessels were scurrying across the entrance and exits of the breakwater, opening and closing the protective booms to regular shipping. Simultaneously in occupied France, the Luftwaffe air base at Beaumont-le-Roger was a hive of activity. 6 German fighter-bomber pilots from 10 JG2 walked across the airfield and stepped onto a hard runway before climbing into their waiting Messerschmitts. The young German pilots were about to embark on an air raid which has largely been forgotten in the history of Plymouth War, but is known by those who were there as the Battle of Cawsand Bay. Low cloud clung around the natural amphitheatre of Plymouth Sound. The temperature was mild and the weather was hazy. 5 anchored merchant vessels were building up a head of steam waiting to join a convoy. The modified destroyer HMS Wolverine was loitering among the merchantmen who would act as a convoy escort. HMS Cleveland and HMS Brocklesby were preparing to let go all lines and slip their berth at Devonport Dockyard. Both vessels were part of the Royal Navy's 15th Flotilla and were scheduled to embark on exercises off the Plymouth areas that morning. 6 Messerschmitts thundered low over the French coast. The aircraft had only been airborne for a matter of minutes as the Cotentin Peninsula's rugged outline appeared and then sprinted off aft. The aircraft had landed to embark fuel and then taken off again from one of the 2 forwardmost airfields in France. This final fuel stop would allow raiding aircraft valuable minutes when on target across the channel before having to return. Lieutenant Hans-Joachim Schulz had only passed out of fighter school at the end of March 1942. The young pilot now flew his BF 109, side number Blue 8, towards England with his wingman at close quarters. The experienced Swarm Führer was out front with his wingman. Another pair of aircraft was similarly orientated for port. The Swarm were following their boss's lead in a well-practiced plan of attack. Just after midday, the 2 Hunt-class escort destroyers, HMS Cleveland and HMS Brocklesby, slipped their berth at Devonport Dockyard. Both vessels headed down the Narrows, past Devil's Point and round Drake's Island, ready to exit the breakwater and out into the Plymouth areas. Unbeknownst to the 2 destroyers and anyone in the Plymouth area, Hans-Joachim Schulz and his 5 comrades were hurtling past the Eddystone Lighthouse, only 14 miles away from Plymouth Sound. And they were closing fast. On their approach to Plymouth Sound, the 6 aircraft split into 3 pairs, following a well-practiced routine. Detailed documents held at the National Archives contain a hand-drawn chart which indicates the track taken by each 3 pairs of aircraft. Over the years there has been much conjecture as to how many German aircraft were actually present at the attack. Some reports say 2 or 4, others say 6. There were indeed 6 aircraft present on the attack at Plymouth Sound. The terrifying spectacle, which took place over the course of around 5 minutes, was witnessed by servicemen at several locations dotted around Plymouth Sound. All the documented accounts vary depending on the line of sight the witness had. The commanding officer of HMS Cleveland said, "We just turned into the swept channel around the south end of the breakwater. We heard away to seaward the sound of several aircraft engines, very low and very fast." The time was 12:44. On the 16th of May, Reginald Burridge was an RAF serviceman serving at RAF Mountbatten. At the time of the Luftwaffe attack, Reg Burridge was stood where the cars are behind me, which would have been the officers' mess at RAF Mountbatten, looking out over Plymouth Sound. He said in his diaries, "During lunch and stand down, and without any prior warning, there arose a considerable rattle of gunfire and the sound of exploding bombs." From his vantage point, Reg Burridge recalls seeing one of the barrage balloons, which was attached to the breakwater, descend in flames after being shot down by one of the Messerschmitts. The chart shows the leading 2 aircraft did not enter Plymouth Sound. They peeled away to port early on in the attack and headed back to France. The remaining 4 aircraft did cross the breakwater and entered into Plymouth Sound. As the aircraft streaked across the eastern end of the breakwater, HMS Cleveland was the first vessel to engage. Sayer ordered Cleveland's 4-inch guns to open fire with a full deflection salvo. The rounds missed the aircraft and thundered into the cliffs at Staden Heights, about 200 yards from where I'm standing now. For maximum impact, the fighter aircraft were deployed with single SC-250 bombs or multiple SC-50 bombs. Andy will give you more detail about these individual weapons.
The 50 kg and the 250 are standard iron bombs, dumb weapons armed with impact fuses in the case of the 50 kg, and in the case of the 250 kg they were armed with a mix of fuses. Of the bombs that were dropped, the 250 kg, although missing its target, was able to cause considerable damage. The records show that the bomb detonated underwater after a short delay. Now, a number of fuses were used in these bombs. One specifically for attacking low level against shipping was the Type 38. The designation for the bomb was the SC-250. This stood for Sprengbom Cylindrique 250, meaning 250 kilograms. Although the bomb is designated an SC-250, that's the combined weight of the casing and the explosive filling. The explosive filling generally would have weighed in the region of 130 kg.
That would correspond with what the engineering officer said on HMS Wolverine. He said the weight of the bomb was estimated at not more than 250 pounds. Once into the confines of Plymouth Sound, the aircraft kept to the starboard side and headed towards the anchored convoy vessels at Jennycliff. Using their machine guns to strafe the ships, the pilots dropped their bombs over the convoy vessels. 2 bombs narrowly missed the merchant ship SS Torquil. The boom defence vessel BV-7 acquired damage from near misses. HMS Wolverine sustained considerable shock damage. As a consequence of the attack, 1 crewman, Naval Seaman James D. Kennedy, was killed. After dropping their bombs, the second pair of aircraft headed back out to sea. Reg Burridge remembers seeing the 2 remaining BF-109s twisting and turning at low altitude, caught in the limited airspace of Plymouth Sound. Schulz and his wingman were now hopelessly confined inside a hornet's nest. Both pilots had released their bombs and pressed home their attack with machine guns in an attempt to escape. Schulz's wingman opened his throttle and headed round to port to try and escape. As he passed close to HMS Cleveland, they opened up on him. His aircraft was hit and was last seen wobbling off into the mist across the channel. Young Hans-Joachim Schulz did not commit such a tight turn. His aircraft passed close to HMS Brocklesby. As he flew over, he opened up on them and strafed them with his machine gun. Several crewmen on board HMS Brocklesby were wounded and a hole was made in a funnel. Pom-pom gunner 21-year-old Trevor Norwich and fellow gunner James Ahern were both injured. Norwich was shot right through his left thigh and suffered a moderate loss of blood and a degree of shock. Schulz was the last BF-109 in Plymouth Sound and stood very little chance of escaping. After strafing HMS Brocklesby, Schulz then passed over HMS Cleveland. She opened up on him with the full force of her pom-pom guns. Schulz's aircraft was straight all the way down his starboard side. Instantaneously, his wing folded over the canopy of his aircraft. It burst into a ball of flame, cartwheeled across Plymouth Sound, and crashed into Cawsand Bay. The Luftwaffe would never attempt another tip and run raid on Plymouth for the rest of the war. The lifeless body of 20-year-old Hans-Joachim Schulz was found very close to the crash site just half an hour afterwards. Schulz's body was taken to the morgue at RAF Mountbatten, where his catastrophic injuries were logged. Schulz was ceremonially transported from RAF Mountbatten to Ford Park Cemetery in Plymouth. A swastika emblazoned flag was draped over the coffin. Members of the RAF bore the coffin to the graveside, where the vicar conducted a short ceremony. Berlin-born Hans-Joachim Schulz lay to rest at Ford Park Cemetery in until the end of March 1963. His body, along with many other Luftwaffe airmen shot down over Great Britain, was then exhumed and reinterred in the German military cemetery at Cannock Chase. Telling reminders of that fateful tip and run raid continued to appear for days, if not years afterwards. The Plymouth Command War Diaries say that 2 days after the attack, on the 18th of May, a German dinghy was recovered 2 cables southwest of Mountbatten Pier. It's very likely this was Schulz's dinghy. The pilots sat on them as they formed part of the seat of the Messerschmitt. On the 21st of May, a patrol from Stoke Point Signal Station reported to the Devon Police Constabulary that they had found a German airman's life jacket washed up on the rocks at Stoke Beach. The jacket was duly collected by service personnel and taken back to RAF Mountbatten. I was very fortunate to be introduced to a man who was a diver and was also a member of the RAF at RAF Mountbatten during the 80s. Him and some friends were diving in Cawsand Bay. They were finning along the bottom and came to a rock. Once they passed behind the rock, they found what they knew to be an aircraft engine. This quickly developed then into a training dive. They decided to recover the engine. What they did then was quite ingenious. They took down 4 barrels full of water and lashed it round the aircraft engine. They then pumped air into the tanks, which expelled the water and gave the barrels buoyancy. The aircraft engine then lifted off the seabed, was lashed to the side of an RAF motor launch and towed back to RAF Mountbatten. It was placed in situ over one of the old Sunderland seaplane slipways. As the tide went out, the engine was lowered onto the slipway and onto a waiting trolley. Not knowing what to do with the engine, the team contacted Helston Aeropark, which is now known as Flambards. They offered the engine to the man who owned Flambards at the time, who was an aircraft enthusiast. The engine was duly collected with much excitement and taken back to Flambards. This is a location chosen by a good friend of mine and talented artist Gordon Frickers. In 2012, Gordon and I collaborated on a painting showing what happened during the Tip and Run campaign. Through my research and Gordon's artistic talent, we came up with this image, which is a clear representation right down to the minutest detail of what actually happened during those 5 minutes during the Battle of Cawsand Bay.
My dad made this.